I have ever heard personally.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I can't think of any that's worked better.
I think people might object to the use of the term like objective, in the sense that it isn't something outside, like in the universe or whatever. It's something like tangible that you can point to. Even if it's like a physics law, you can still think about it objectively because it affects everything in a systematic manner. But like with the moral stuff, it's more like a theory, in the sense that because he remember when he brings in like if AIs are going to be affected by, or they evolve to have the same morals as everyone else. Yeah. But it's not like there's a law that imposes this stuff to happen in the nature, like a physics law, like gravity. Gravity affects everything. But this would be more like, would this be more like evolution? I'm not sure about that. I have to think.
Yeah, like a guiding force, but maybe not quite. I don't know. Like gravity only applies. I'm just talking out of my ass, kind of. But gravity only applies in our universe, right? With math and. No, not even close.
You're going that route.
Okay, I would say it's like using the two different terms of objective, like objective outside of any mind. You know what I mean? Like that's what I think you're saying is right, like even with like aliens, it's still within their mind that this is the thing. But
right.
But yeah, like gravity is outside of any mind. But I think objective would be like it's objective in a different sense, I guess.
That's how I always took it to mean.
Yeah, I think people would generally get hung up on that. On the objective part and the definition part. These are like two main things.
Like I kind of go with like Matt Dillahunty's, where he says like what I consider moral is subjective, but if me and you agree about the morality, then it becomes objective, like in its objective fact.
So it's would this example work? Like carcinogen objectively kills people, right? But it doesn't apply to like rocks, right?
Evolution doesn't apply to rocks either, right?
Right. Yeah. So evolution, carcinogen killing people, morality being objective, that would apply to, things with minds, right?
Mm-hmm.
And gravity just applies to everything.
Mm-hmm.
Why is my microphone stuck on? Hold on.
You gotta think about this a bit more.
I had a question for Heraclitus real quick. When you were talking about the nanites, what would the nanites do in this thing? That's what I didn't understand.
So here's where it becomes not too difficult, but a little bit strange, because it has to do with size versus function, which is complicated, because then it has to incorporate like perception, right? And so for example, when studying like the idea of nanites, let's say you want to change the functional behavior of a cell. Okay, what size does a nanite have to be in order to prepare for all the changes in the conditions and pressures that you're willing to want to implement into the cell? But then the second question is, how do you program a perception malleable enough as a parameter in something like a nanite in order for it to do its job in accordance with what you want it to do? And so I think what these nanites need, and this is why I think and the specification is necessary. I think by 2050, 2060, more likely, we're going to have, I don't think it's any singularity or any nonsense like that, but I think that we are going to have subatomic nanite technology, and I have a paper on the proceedings to mesomechanics and stuff to show you people who've been working in the 80s on, which is really creepy, working already on the idea of like these atomic and molecular nanites already. And so would be, how the hell do we put something like an artificial intelligence into a nanite that is capable of doing the same things that someone perceiving a cell under a certain mode of explanation can do it? And that's a hard question. So that's why I think we would start. That's why I think the nanites would have to do, and that's how it would start. Did I answer the question?
I guess I still don't know. Like, you're telling me about like what a nanite would have to be, but it doesn't tell me what the nanite would do. Would like replace of what the cell is doing, or like change the cell to be better? Or I guess I don't know what the nanite would be doing itself.
Yeah, this is what's difficult, which is basically, well, first, are there multiple causal chains in something like cellular automata? I think the answer is yes, but I can't be sure how many. And then the second question is, can we ever have a descriptive model that covers all the functional processes of something like a cellular automata that is not limited by our perceptions or mode of description? And I think the answer is no. You'll never be able to exhaust that, because no matter what we base the complexity on, it will be based on the same organism that we're trying to observe. And so it will be limited in some fashion. And so the issue with the issue with the nanite is what it will do in general. It will discern a point in time where, relative to the cell, there's this open period where the conditions and pressures are such that the functional processes can be manipulated in a way that those cells can act as their own colony and begin to build against the self-reference of the organism on the macro scale. But I have no idea how that would occur, because it would all depend on the complexity that something like a nanite that we are programming can discern perceptually. But that's the first step. So it depends how deep you want to go. That was my issue with trying to talk to Tom, because I was trying to make sure that I'm getting the frame right, because it really depends on how far we want to dive into it. So that's what the nanite would do. It would do that
much
to its
better.
program.
That's much better.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, I think if we could find a way to do something along that level, then I mean, it would almost be at the level like you're talking about with the singularity, like being able to program something that can do more than what we can, think in a way that we can't, so that it can recognize things we can't at this level and be able to take action ahead of time. I think that'd be beautiful.
Yeah, and the best case scenario is it will. We already have this with Neuralink, with Elon Musk's Neuralink, which it will. It's worse than the placebo effect. Something like a neural chip can stimulate these neural impulses, these neural pulses, and once that's possible, then at the nanite level, if you get to pick what the program is, what the mode of complexity is, and then you aim it at a certain functional process, and it's actually biophysical, then that means the nanite is having a symbiotic relationship from its program with the cell, and the cell is doing the same thing to the nanite inadvertently, which means that now the body, depending, and this is where it gets crazy, so I'm not sure how far to go here, but then that would also mean not only would our body be able to adjust without the nanite, if we program the nanite to work in a certain way, but that means that the nanite would learn about itself as if it could be a form of biological matter, and then we can use that memory later to maybe use nanites for different functions. And the weirdest thing is that I think cells would be able to
Going back to what I was saying before this final thing. I wonder what would happen to the self-reference of the organism if that occurred. Because if that occurred, not only would it lead to possibilities of longevity, but it would lead to immortality, because if you break the idea of self-reference in a certain, like, unconditioned, in a certain underdetermined space, then you could literally program, in some sense, how your self-reference makes available all of the organs to the central nervous system. And once you do that, you will literally be able to, 50 years down the line, construct an arena where your thoughts will have a direct correspondence to what's happening in the organism, and vice versa. And that's where I think immortality will be achieved.
Yeah, I see what you're saying for sure.
Yeah. Forgive me if I get too dorky. It's really tricky to know.
For me.
I mean,
But it
we on
sounds
this-
cool.
We entertain
My first-
ourselves having our own universe in this server all the time, so don't worry about it.
The only problem I would see is, like, what if an EMP goes off? You know what I mean? Would those nanites just be done? But what would that do to the person?
Question. In the beginning, that would be a serious problem, and I think what that would do to the person is it will cause forms. I like focusing on the neural aspect because that's the easiest. It would damage neurons on a molecular scale that we would not be able to develop a descriptive model around, and so it will be a form of brain damage that will be molecularly toxic, and that will be the end of it. And so we would need to have things in place for that. And I think what will end up happening is probably Elon Musk, with already his neural chip, is tricking the brain into thinking that the brain's impulses are its impulses. I think eventually both those things will smooth out into each other and create a form of metastability where the brain is already confused by its own placebo effect about what's happening in that area, and the chip is already confused about its actual role in accordance with the brain. And so both will kind of fuse with each other and then create a kind of symbiotic immunobiology that we can hopefully program. But by then, it would be actually a good argument to say that we probably won't even make it there. I mean, it would probably be so easy at that point just to, like, EMP people or hack them remotely and stuff like that. So that's a real problem. I don't know how to get out of that. But it is possible to get past it, but I don't think, maybe we won't. Yeah. Tricky.
It's a neat idea to entertain for sure. I mean, I of course you hope sooner than later that stuff like that ends up happening. But what do you think, realistically, when do you see something like this coming about?
With the nanites, I was being honest, probably like easily 35 to 40 years. Like I was trying to say to Tom, but that's his name, right? Like that, because I only know his. Okay, just making sure. Yeah, I was just gonna say, yeah. So, I think that, yeah, definitely 30 to 40 years. But then the main issue that I was trying to express to Tom was that you can't. We are either already too much in the determinate state of affairs of our biology, or we are not enough embedded in the conditions and pressures of our biological substrate. And so there has to be, and I'm not even saying it's real, because then that's metaphysics or whatever, it doesn't matter. I would say, even without philosophy, just on principle, you have to have a remainder, a third thing that just will help you with your analog, with your introspection, to be able for you to realize, yes, there are some modes of this self-referencing organism where it's free in the sense that I am able to generate spontaneity within a fixed rule system. And then there are some parts of states of affairs when I'm inside myself. And even if I create a descriptive model, I am already fixed to only see maybe 12 to 100 certain descriptive models. And therefore, I'm going to be limited by what I can see of myself. And so, but that was very hard to explain, but I think that that's very important because, as you can see, both would be a huge problem. And so, and I think philosophy does that well, and it takes it too far by making it metaphysical. But it just posit a third remainder in order to help with introspection, so that the practice of science doesn't get confused with its presupposition of what is already discerned. Because I think that is dangerous, and I think that we're already doing that already with the complexity of the cell.
I agree.
Yeah. But it's very difficult. I have a difficulty since I like metaphysics. It's very hard to create a ladder to explain all that well. But yeah, and which is why most people are like, oh, isn't it just a philosophical quibble? And it's like, well, yeah, but if we're talking about science, of course that could go out the window. And then we have more of a biographical issue where if you're trying to incorporate a methodology, don't get caught up in the pre-affirmation of your own psychic state of affairs when you're creating a descriptor type. But everyone's just like, oh, that's gobbledygook. It's like, no, it's not. If you believe that you're an organism and that it isn't fun and games, of course the cells and the molecules, even the neurotransmitters, are complex enough to create modes of generative spontaneity that put into question on principle, not literally, because we need science, we need experiments to prove that, but just on principle that there's something else out there that we have to posit just to get back into our own heads and try to rethink it.
And I think that you use, you have your unique approach, which I think was initially being challenged, but I see it as, your third, that third remainder is what expands things for you, expands potential, and also doesn't limit you, but it also gives you another avenue of confronting yourself. So how can you argue against that when you are seeing more potential coming from that more complex framework, but you're also injecting more possible, not limitations, but just ways to disprove where you're going, if that makes any sense. From my limited perspective, but you're adding more to it, and maybe it sounds woo-woo, but I know how you think, even though I don't necessarily think the same way. But I just see it as that might be exactly what gets you there, because you have this expanded perception that goes outside of like a scientist per se.
Right, but see, that's the issue, because like I agreed, because I noticed that with Tom, he was reading me, which is good, and it wasn't, I don't feel like it was in any particular judgmental way outside of contextual dependency, and that's not dependency on him as a person. I think it's dependency on, if we're talking about something specific and it's already initially there in the context of the conversation, it's very hard to create new locuses of activity that are pointing to a different nuance of the context. And so, but then at the end, it was cool, because then we both, like, I kept trying to tell him, I'm like, no, I agree. I don't have any of these other assumptions, because unfortunately he's probably used to idiots as well. And so it's like, is that woo? Are you positing some kind of wonder tissue philosophical? No, I'm just kidding. I probably didn't think that far. But yeah, that's what most people would like
say, and it's like, damn, how many people have ruined contextual intelligence of discourse before me that the rest of us have to deal with that kind of like linguistic jostling. It's tough.
Yeah, but I think you're good at explaining it, and then you also understand. Yeah, it's a locus. It's the same. I mean, I know what you're talking about. We don't have to rehash it, but I think you're good at that because you know how he's seeing you, and it's just a matter of linguistically getting him into the dimension from which you're speaking, which you did. Bravo.
Thank you. I try. I cross my fingers and then I take a deep breath and then I just say whatever.
Because where you're at is where you're at. It's a whole different ball game to speak about it and to articulate it. And I think brilliant at that. And that's how we can access what your mind is doing, because you can articulate it quite well. And even though it's so abstract and outside of normal scientific discourse and inquiry, you're still able, when you're lucky, rarely able to bring someone into that, obscure, abstract dimension that's a little bit outside of what normally would be talked about. So that's exactly why people kind of just quickly dismiss you and don't give you that chance, because they don't understand.
Yeah, but it's what. It's weird because, but I wanted to ask you. I want to ask, like, I was curious about what you guys were discussing beforehand, or what you guys would want to discuss without said detriment. Like, what were you guys into in terms of, like, especially you, Amy? Like, what were you talking about? Who were you talking about before that you thought about inviting me?
I don't even remember. And I was wandering through the grocery store, so my attention was divided, but something, immortality came up, or just longevity or something. And it was just kind of like a slower part of the conversation, because initially it was crazy and everyone was talking over each other. And they were talking about, how would you explain? He was giving his philosophy or his ideal world, where everyone has free will. I don't know. Someone else can help me out explaining that.
Subjective morality, TJump, subjective morality framing.
Okay.
You're
is
low.
objective
Like, I can barely
morality.
hear you.
Yeah, Lawson.
Oh, I was just
Yeah. So it's basically imposition of will. That's an objective, I guess, fact or about morality, and that the best possible world would be everyone has their own universe, and no one could impose their will on somebody else's unless they wanted it to, unless the other person wanted it to.
Beautiful. Yeah, isn't that the theory of happiness boxes, or where in the future where VR or AR gets sufficiently advanced, where it's like the self-enclosing thing again. You'll be able to somehow turn yourself into a kind of black box and then procedurally generate that which you already are infinitely. Yeah, I agree that that's the best of all possible worlds. It actually scares me because, and this I think is going to be like, I heard some futurists call it a fetish, and I thought that was funny. I was like, oh, maybe that's true. And basically my concern was something along the lines of, but wait, if that's the best possible world and we're all living in it, then what is there objectively to do outside of that which we are self-enclosed in that would be a real contending force with reality, and not just reality as such? And I heard some futurists say, oh, well, that's semantics, reality will be reality as such because everything will be programmable. You'll be in your own universe. And I'm like, there's something wrong with that. There's always has to be, maybe I'm wrong, but there always has to be an outside that dictates the subject of the internal.
right?
Oh.
Even if the internal is fully programmable, or
My thing, like his goal seemed to be like to end suffering. Is that accurate, you guys? Isn't that what he was asserting, that there would be no suffering? And I'm like, isn't there suffering? Like, isn't there a benefit?
I
And
was
don't
going to
know
ask
that
you
I
about
want to
that.
live in it. Yeah,
I
I
wanted
don't
to ask
want
you
to
about that.
live in it.
Why do you think
I
there's a benefit
can
to
answer that.
suffering?
It's
Because
because.
it's just
Oh, I'm sorry. I was gonna answer. I think I know how to answer that. I
What's
think
up?
Tom would answer by saying that it's only a benefit in this world, which is not the best of all possible worlds, because we have to contrast it with not suffering, which is
yeah,
the only
but
way we can really
it's
drive.
boring. Isn't it boring? Because
Best
contrast
of
is
all
what
possible
brings
worlds, I don't think it'd
life.
be possible for you to be bored.
Pardon me?
In the best of all possible worlds, I don't think it would be possible for you to be bored.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, I can entertain myself. Like, I don't need much to entertain myself. But yeah, I mean, I guess I'd have to think more about it.
yeah, because in
But
the happiness box, it would be like the positive scenario of the pleasure heads, where you'll be able to have like scalars on the on the inside of. Well, I guess they
it's a
wouldn't even have
fractal
to be.
world.
You wouldn't even need to be hardware. You would just have
Like,
like these, like an app, and then you'd be like, oh, happiness is at 42%. Let's bump it up to 86. And then there's this. There'll even be a thought slider where it's like, okay, increase the slider to have more openness without the neuroticism, and then go to the other part of the slider to have just pure neuroticism, so you can go mad and have like a fun little unconscious trip. And so that just brings more problems, because
okay, I'm
in a
down with
happiness
that.
box that would be possible. Yeah.
You need something to just. I mean, maybe I'm a little bit masochistic like that, but it's like, I like to do things that are dangerous and scary. Like it makes you feel alive, and it brings some kind of je ne sais quoi to life. And I think I could be happy without that, but I don't know, like none of us can really relate to an absence of suffering. And, you know, that could be good. It's fun.
It's
We all
tricky.
love drama so much, though. You know what I mean? Like, but I think
Yeah,
we could adapt.
I agree with you. I would just replace suffering with a notion of objectivity. I think even if we were able to program whatever true reality is, or real reality, or absolute reality, whatever you want to call it, even if that's possible, which I don't think it is, but let's say it is, there would still be a notion of objectivity that, on principle, says, well, that's not truly objective because it was programmed. And even though it would be, even though it would be true, you can program it not to be true, and vice versa. But then the real world that's not programmed can do the same thing to the happiness box. So it's still like, so I think with the possible worlds thing, it is a true best of all possible worlds, but only if, and I think all of us are these kinds of people, as long as we all agree that we now view reality through our own interface and deal with those problems in more of a leisurely fashion. Because you could still deal with the notion of objectivity in the happiness box without turning any sliders, without doing anything, and you'd have an infinite amount of time with no suffering to determine what the meaning of suffering is. And so it's like, the outside of the happiness box is inside of the happiness box, and vice versa. Therefore, we have a problem, and we also don't have a problem. And if you're not a philosopher, most people won't have that problem because they're sheep.
Yeah.
Yeah, Amy, I think what you're doing is you're kind of taking the pragmatic approach, and you're taking what we have now and like comparing it to the best of all possible worlds. That wouldn't, like in best of all possible worlds, that wouldn't happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm picking up what you are laying down now. Thanks for the bump up. I tend to hover in a lower dimension, and I'm working on it.
I have a fun question that. Oh, go ahead, Lawson.
No, I just make stupid jokes. Ignore me.
What'd you say?
Go ahead.
Sorry.
I'm kidding. I just make dumb jokes every now and then. You guys can talk.
Oh, that's fine. I like dumb jokes. But no, I was gonna ask like a kind of playful question, but I'm serious. If there's a serious answer, in the best of all possible worlds, the happiness box, is there a space of possibilities that where there is a possibility that there are new possibilities that can't be within the happiness box? And I think the answer has to be yes, if the happiness box is the best of all possible worlds, because it would be both within the set of possibilities and outside as a real set of possibilities before the happiness box. But if the answer is yes, then that means that there can be infinite happiness boxes within happiness boxes, and you'll still never exhaust the best of all possible happiness boxes. But if the answer is no, we still have the problem, except the problem would be you can never have a universe that encloses its content absolutely onto itself within any moment of itself, and therefore it is indivisible in a weird way. And so, like, I'm sorry if I went too far in that direction, but is there an issue here in terms of if that's the case?
I'd just say
So you're seeing a paradox, is what you're trying to say.
Yes, either a paradox or the paradox is simply a signal for a higher mode of complexity that we have to think about that the happiness box might be able to fix, or that the universe might be able to.
Ideal, but if it's the ideal universe, then it has to allow for that.
Yeah, that's the issue. Does an ideal universe allow for the possibility of higher ideals that are outside of that universe that can, but are not yet in that universe? If the answer is yes, then why don't we stick to that real universe instead of the happiness box? And isn't the universe the best possible world?
Yes.
Yeah, I would say that would just come down to the true actual meaning of life. Like if the actual meaning of life is, something like just, maximizing happiness all the time, then you wouldn't have a problem. But if it's something else more, ethereal, then yeah, you would run into that problem probably.
Right. Yeah. So you would say it's based on the state of affairs of the subject at hand within whatever situation we're talking about?
If it's subjective, yeah, then it would. But if the purpose of life is actually objective, and there really is something that we can all have, we just don't know it right now, then yeah, it wouldn't be a problem.
I agree. And then I wonder if you would follow me on this too. I would say that there is an objective explanation for subjectivity, and there is a possible but incomplete definition of objectivity in subjectivity. And if that's the case, wouldn't it be the case that life is both has a subjective component that can be lived objectively, and vice versa?
I'd say that's possible. Yeah.
Okay. Then because that's my thought process. Because then, and maybe this is just because of what I want from the universe, but I would think, oh, that would be great, because that would just be another mode of complexity to explore, which would make, again, me as a subjective actor, make life worth living. The pursuit of indefinite meaning in life is the meaning of life, and allows life.
And then you don't need the suffering if you have all that. Like that kind of negates or neutralizes my quote concern about the absence of suffering.
Great, because I assumed that with suffering you meant we're gonna miss something that is really real and not merely real. That's kind of how
like you, I want to experience all the things too. But do I? Do I just on principle? And I can ask you that. Like, do you really want to experience all that? Or if you could remove suffering, would that be preferred if you can experience all the other things? What would your
Okay.
take on that be?
I'm gonna say the most corny thing possible that you either would probably expect me to say or not expect me to say, which is, if I could end suffering for everyone else, I'd probably do it, because it's equivalent to wiping my ass. It's like, oh, this should have
You're
been done
acting
a
like
long
you
time
care.
ago. Like this should have been done long a time ago. No one deserves to suffer. Let's just nip this in the butt and get rid of it. But if you ask me, if I wanted to experience, what was the question again? I just lost
Well,
it. Damn
because
it.
you're all about, the infinite. This is what we talked about, the
Right.
last couple times, and you don't want anything limiting your experiences, especially silly girls.
Right.
So, is suffering part of that infinite experience that you want to participate in and experience?
Yes. But that's an issue, obviously. But you can't, it's weird. In that sense, it's not that you can't eliminate suffering or that you ought to experience all modes of suffering just to experience everything, but it's more like
The capacity.
not even the capacity. I think, and I imagine you agree with this too, that suffering is complex. And so I think it would be like a new form of perversion. Like when you're at that state where you can program your own brain, I think you owe it to yourself to explore those perversities, because God knows what that happens to the makeup of how you reincorporate the self-reference of yourself.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, and I don't think everyone, just the experience that I had in that previous chat. I don't know that Tom would agree with that. What do you guys think?
Oh, would he say something along the lines of perhaps that everything is like a drive?
His whole point.
No,
But his whole point was
he would agree
eliminating
with it.
suffering.
He would agree with it, but the difference is, as long as it doesn't impose on somebody else's will.
Oh yeah, well he would agree that you're allowed to do that, but he wouldn't. I don't think he himself would choose that. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, no, well, he doesn't care about what he chooses. He just cares about imposition of will. So think of everything through the lens of imposition of will. So you can do whatever you want. If you wanted to suffer, you could suffer because that's your choice. But you can't make other people suffer unless they wanted.
Because that's I
agree.
was kind of
That's cool.
confused because I missed I kind of jumped in the middle of it, but I was thinking that his ideal included an absence of suffering, but I guess that was just because most people would probably choose that, and if most people could create their ideal, that's the first thing that they would choose. But he himself, you're saying, is kind of neutral on that.
Yeah, it seems like he cares more about the implications upon others than his personal preferences, perhaps. In general.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. He sounds awesome. Thanks for the invite to this server, Amy. Like a lot of cool people in here.
I mean, it's my first time in here too.
Yeah, it's good talking to you. I appreciate the convo.
Yeah, Tom does a lot of debates. Like, there's quite a bit of content Tom puts out all the time, and he does a lot of debates, especially on morality. And you get a better sense with that. But he's mainly talking with like theists and stuff. But the real good ones is when he's talking to like philosopher professors and stuff. Those are real good conversations. Sometimes it goes beyond what I'm capable of.
What are
That's
you?
awesome.
Are you a philosopher professor?
Oh no, I'm not. No, but he interviews them and talks to them about different stuff, and puts them out. And so they talk about stuff that's sort of beyond me, about my knowledge about philosophy and stuff.
Yeah, same. That's why I'm glad that you're enjoying it. How do you say your name? Heraclitus?
Who, me?
Heraclitus? Yeah.
Oh, Heraclitus.
Heraclitus.
Yeah.
Okay, I was saying it wrong. I knew I was saying it wrong. I'm glad that you are enjoying it because I can't quite, you know, I'm seeing that you're being challenged in the ways that you enjoy, and you're actually getting through to people that understand you, which is rare. And so I'm glad it went well because I can't, quite engage, especially with philosophy
Yeah, but
on that level.
it's weird if you notice what I've been noticing more and more is that when you get when you get rid of the when you get rid of the context dependency, there's only two ways that a conversation can go, absolutely generally. The first being, and correct me if I'm wrong, the first being that the conversation ends up in an agreement space where not everything becomes agreeable, but where things become open because there's a fidelity in the opening up of that space, because there was an agreement as to the domain of where we're speaking within, which is fine.
Mhm.
But then that usually, if you're doing your job really well and you're being authentic, then it kind of turns into a friendship that is, or a kind of life of its own that is irreducible to anything that can ever be discussed. And so it's kind of like over in that sense. Like, you either have a choice. Okay, do you want to talk forever, which most people aren't into, or do you want to make a friend? But if you choose making a friend, which is what I usually like doing because secretly I want to talk forever, but then once you do that, then it ends. Most people are just like, okay, that's cool. I agree. Now I got to do something, or I'll get to that mode of difference that you introduced into my life later on.
Yeah.
And then it just becomes, it's good. I think this is the best thing. But to me, it sucks because it becomes less about the conversation and more about absolute life itself, which you would think would be great, but it's not
which
great if
people
you
are
just want to
stuck
stick to
in.
thinking.
People are stuck in that mode of just the hamster wheel and the unconscious sleepwalking through life, where they don't have the time to just have a conversation like we do for 7 hours straight, and that's unfortunate. And I'm grateful for the opportunity the time that I have to indulge and engage in these things. And this is how we change the world. And yeah, people don't have time to. I think most people would think that they don't have 5 minutes to ponder such frivolous things as philosophy,
Yeah.
And then so they dismiss it, and they what's the word that like it's almost what would they call it, where they're condemning it kind of just as frivolous, which is interesting,
Yeah, because that to me proves it. Well, this proves the obvious in a weird way, but to me, it's a scary fact, which is most people are more like people than they are the faculty of their thoughts. Which most people would think, well, that's great.
They identify
for the person,
with themselves,
but it's not great for thought. And so I would actually, I really love Tom's idea, and I would say that the best of all possible worlds for a philosopher would be that philosophy, or everything, reality itself, should be about the imposition of thought as the prescription to think in the first place. And you can never finish that loop. And there's no duality, there's no monism, there's just fractals, there's just Russian dolls all the way up and down. And I think that would be the happiness box in the philosophical best of all possible worlds. And I think that makes for good intellectual conversation if we live under that presupposition.
Yeah, I agree. And I think people are they're living in a crisis. They're in crisis mode and they're in survival mode, right? Like
Yes.
they are at the base of their brain. They're at the just pure survival. They're just trying to get through the day,
Right.
which is what philosophy could ultimately help with, but right. I mean, and I'm guilty of it myself, just not taking the time to think about, well, I think about how I'm thinking, but not in a practical, nothing I do is practical, which is kind of my struggle because I don't like to think that way. So nothing gets done, but yeah, I love it.
I think it's what people value. I mean, if they don't value, I don't know how to probably a bad term for it, intellectualism, then
Yeah.
they're not going to pursue that sort of thing. If they're content with just what's going on in their life and they're just not interested in it. I mean, there's some people that just aren't interested in sports. You know what I mean? And there's some people who are really interested in sports. So it's kind of like that, what they value and not value.
Yeah, but I think that they really don't know what they value because they've never had they've never had the freedom to choose what to spend their time on, so to speak. So even though I think there are some people, as we all know, who don't quite value intellectual anything, to the chicken horror of people that would be in this channel. It's like how can you not find this shit fascinating? People think I'm fucking crazy. But I also think that they, have not had the opportunity to pursue at all. So yeah, they might be limited, and they might not enjoy it, but I think they haven't had a chance to explore their own intellectual whatever it is. So I wonder, what that would look like if you could remove the limitations to, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to figure out what the sort of like the problems are, and I don't know where you guys are located, but in the United States, I mean, we from elementary to middle school to high school, we're telling kids what to think instead of how to think. So people don't know how to think, and that's probably the biggest problem is people don't know how to think, and so they're just going by what they were told.
Yeah, they're discouraged to think, and that's exactly what I was getting at. And so, if you have been discouraged to think your whole life, then how do you know whether or not you enjoy thinking?
Well, that's the whole point. Is they're ignorant. They're ignorant about it. So, but the thing is like it's almost like the term "ignorance is bliss" is true. Where they don't know, so it doesn't bother them because they don't know.
Right.
That's
where. Oh, go ahead.
No, you have heard me say that, like, that I struggle sometimes and kind of wish that I didn't think so much and see so much, and because there is that, there's that, and I think I even said the ignorance is bliss thing. Like there is something to that, although I don't think I would choose that if I could, because I am who I am. So I can see the. It's not even utility, but I can see
they're not choosing. That's the whole point. They're not choosing it. They're ignorant of it because they get. I mean, if they weren't ignorant of it, they would have a choice, right? But they're ignorant of it, so they really don't have a choice. They don't know any better. That's the problem.
Right, and isn't the main problem? Oh, go ahead.
And so yeah, I'm saying is the main problem is they don't know. So then it becomes is how do we get them to know, and then how do we get them to care?
Right.
Yeah, we put them in the ideal universe. Sorry, I keep cutting you off.
No, it's okay. I was just gonna say, I think the fundamental issue with with choice and freedom and value is that value is already cut off at what it's distinguished as within value is always imposed or juxtaposed onto an active um um an active distinction and active environment. And so because these things overlap obviously, and because they're both active, the ability to make a choice is limited, not permanently, but it's limited by the fact that certain things are overdetermined by the preconditions that we are in, and then impress already what we value, and then that changes the very perception of how we go about something like a decision when it comes to value, and how we value something like a decision, which is again the same overlap between an active distinction and an active environment. So we have to figure out how to get rid of this double bind, double repetition, it seems. Would that sound accurate?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I think. That's what that was. I think that's what we're all saying, but that's a more.
but
Of course,
you're
a more
almost saying like it was
sophisticated
a
view.
catch-22 when you do it that way, right?
We'll say it again.
You're saying like it's almost like a catch-22 when you say it the way you said it.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Like where is the point where you can have an influence? Like going back to the nanites and all that and the immortality stuff. Can you find a point of influence where the pressures are at a level of intensity where whatever you're trying to influence can actually be implemented both in the realm of decision and in the realm of value as something that has potential to act spontaneously later and give new domains that are already not impressionable? And that's really
That would be the difficult part. The first part I think would be an easier part just by mapping the brain and the sending neurological signals, but then the second part would be the most difficult part of something brand new,
Yeah, like how do we even get that, because when isn't everything that we get an effect of some external stimulus being registered by this organism? And so when it isn't that a kind of impression, and so then how can you even develop
I don't know. I'm not sure about the external stimulus, you know what I mean? 'Cause we do internal stimulus. I'm getting feedback. Hold on. I don't know if you have stereos on yours. But like we have chemicals that affect our brain we produce chemicals what's inside our bodies, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's like external. It's not external to us that those things are happening.
That's true. Yeah. Right. And didn't Chomsky prove that most of language is also internal as well?
All language is internal. It's all language is complete. Yeah, all language is internal. It's made up. Math, laws of logic, all that stuff is all descriptive. They're made up. We use it to describe stuff. Like why do we call a tree a tree? There's no tree. The word tree anywhere objectively. It's just describing this thing
and limiting it.
Yeah, well, we just make categories. That's all we do is we find patterns. We're
right.
Like as Matt Dillahunty would say, we're pattern recognizing machines. We recognize patterns and we recognize the difference between this pattern and that pattern, and that's what we do. We categorize things into patterns.
But then in doing that, it limits our ability to relate things to each other in novel ways, even though we can still do that. But I think it kind of traps us. That is, and we have to have a framework from which to interpret the world and quantify it and talk about it. So there's utility there, but it's also very limiting to categorize everything. And it seems like we just keep cutting things up more and more and more, and everyone's so specialized.
Yeah, like I guess would be the perfect example is the gender, right? So when somebody says female, we used to automatically think of biological female. You know what I mean? Like they have a vagina, but now it's not quite like that, right?
Right.
Yeah. So when we categorize it in the thing, the problem is that the way we categorize it is the issue.
Right.
Not
Well,
categorizing is not the issue. It's how we categorized it is the issue, and that limits us how we categorize things.
but no matter how you choose, you're still limiting, right? Or not?
Yes, but the
I think
issue
so too.
would. Yeah, 100%. But then the issue, is this biological substrate, since it's made of biological matter, in some sense, it seems like it has to specify something. It can't be a pure state where we can have a non-specified specification that is the absolute uncategory of that which we were trying to point at in the first place. That's possible. That's possible after the fact, once we're on the metacognitive perch. But it seems like our internal, and this is where I get confused, and this is where I wonder if Razor, you could help me. Since all language is internal, just a very basic question, like how does that work in terms of how we figure out which words we say in accordance with sentences within that internal within the internality of that? Because wouldn't there have to be, I don't know about the physical stuff, but because language is complicated neurologically, but where would the distinction between the biological matter and the internal substrate that generates these words that we use, like where does the decision begin and end? Where does the value begin and end? And if the answer is I don't know, I also don't know, and think that maybe that not knowing is not a fact that will stay with us permanently, but it is an abstract. It is a non. Okay, it is a non-actual fact that affects the impressionability of all values and decisions, because we already have this problem with initial impressions. So I think we can't escape that in a weird way.
Yeah, I don't think we can escape it, but language is abstract to begin with, and we made rules. We completely made the rules. The rules are arbitrary, right? Like chess, we made the game chess, but the rules of chess are completely arbitrary. They're just made up, you know.
So can we change the
like
rules?
that? Yeah. Oh yeah, we can change rules. But the thing is we for like this, we came up with the laws of logic. There's no like laws of logic out objectively in the world. It's just that's how we use them to, I don't know how to say it, to describe things or to sort of like make reasonable things. And what all it is we use a language to describe things and we communicate with it. But it's completely abstract. Like math is abstract. Like there is no 1 + 1 out in the universe. You know what I mean? It's just completely made up, you know? It just is a representation of something.
And I think the fact that you know that and can talk about that gives you a chance. I think that most people are are stuck in the identification of themselves. They're stuck on, they're walking through life unconscious, and they're stuck on labels and those categories. But that's not to say that, I agree with what you're saying. And I think you have to accept what is, but you also see the fluidity of it, which is necessary. And I just think it's funny that, or unfortunate rather, that most people might not even agree with you.
Well,
But we won't let them get in the way.
Sorry. Yeah. So Payne was saying, like, I was arguing with a pre-supper with saying we have to presuppose the laws of logic, and we don't. That's just
right.
We even if you go to Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and you look up laws of logic or basic laws of logic, it even says it's a language.
Right. Exactly.
And we came up with them, you know what I mean? And we follow them because they make sense to us. And so that's basically what it is,
Yeah.
So,
and people take that a little too seriously, right? Like they get stuck in, yeah.
Well, then I think that's a problem with ego with it. You know what I mean? I guess a lot of people have a problem. Well, it's another thing how we grow up is, especially in the United States, of being wrong is a big deal. You know what I mean? Like, and who was it? Neil deGrasse Tyson said something that kind of plays into this is when we test somebody, right, and we have the word cat and somebody spells it KAT and another person spells it XYZ, right? Even though the person that spelled it KAT is like phonetically correct, and got real close, we mark it as wrong. Both of them are wrong equally.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of saying,
these days you get the right answer in school and you still get it wrong if you don't want you to show your work, which is what you were talking about earlier.
I'm sorry, it kind of broke up a little bit. What was that?
You glitched halfway through. Yeah.
Never mind. It's okay.
Yeah. So basically, it's basically the problem of being wrong. Where they care too much about them being right instead of what is true. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like, okay, I have a question. Because since language is abstract, but you can have an abstract descriptive meta language on a particular language that you have already properly defined in your head conceptually, right? If that's the case, is that activity happening abstractly or is it happening biophysically? Because if it's happening
no, I would say it's happening biophysically, when like we've already done there's already been experiments where we touch part of the brain and we can make people think they made the choice, but really we've electrocuted their brain to make that choice, So basically, yeah. So basically, what that basically shows is that the brain is the mind is like an emergent property of the brain. So our mind is able to abstract whatever it wants to, right?
Right.
Well, as I mean, I guess as long as it's, I don't know if it's you have to be coherent or follow within the laws of logic or something like that. I don't know. I guess you can. I don't know if you can imagine like a round circle, but I mean not a round circle, a square circle or something. But
a round square.
A round square or a square circle or whatever. I don't know if you can imagine that. You know what I mean?
But you can talk about an abstraction. Right.
Yeah, we can talk about the abstraction, or we can think about a lot of different like creatures or anything like that. But the origins of that is your brain, your neuron signals. You know what I mean? So the abstraction is the idea of it is a thing, you know what I mean? Is electrical impulses, but the actual thing doesn't exist out in reality, you know?
Right. Language. Language about language is an emergent property of the abstractions of a biophysical state that allowed that abstraction to occur.
Yeah, I don't know why I guess you're trying to make it complicated, more complicated than it has to be. So you have a biophysical. So let's go bottom up. So you have a biophysical issue that creates abstractions, and you can make abstractions upon abstractions upon abstractions. Okay, but it still stems from the biophysical.
Yes. Yeah. But basically, the reason why I didn't mean to make it complicated was upon each ascending abstraction, is there always a novel or generative mechanism on the bottom on the biophysical level? And if that is the case for each continuing ascending abstraction, what is the relationship between continuous repetition of generation on the abstract level in relation to its biophysical level? That's where I get confused. Because it's still the same no matter what, no matter how far you abstract.
Well, my first answer to the most honest answer is I don't know. I don't think anybody knows where the origins of abstraction comes from. Like how does the neurons form in the brain and do it? We haven't come up with that model yet. We might have. I really don't know. But I would say is the abstraction. There's only one abstraction, and you abstracting upon that is just part of the original abstraction.
Okay, so it's not that a little.
There's not like abstraction upon abstraction upon abstraction, like a new abstraction every time. It's just your mind being able to have this concept of all these abstractions, but it's just really one abstraction.
Okay, because
that would be my guess. I mean that's what I would see it as.
Okay, because I read a paper. Hopefully, I could bring it up if I can find it. It's basically last name starts with Sachs. He works on he talks a lot about visual hallucinations and stuff. But he was talking about how neurons can have such intense modes of expertise that if you actually watch Disney Channel growing up, not only might you have 80 neurons that remember an associative helix of what was occurring in that episode, but you'll even have subneuronal species that only remember something like Goofy's face. And there's 2 neurons for that hyper specialized for that specifically, and where the memory unit is within and moves it. Obviously, it doesn't have to remain static in that one neuron, but let's say it goes to another neuron because it's plastic, that it will still be the same face, the same expertise, just shared upon. And so I thought, well, if that's the case, then not only do I not know, but I also don't know what it is that the structure of a neuron does to itself, or what abstraction is doing on top of itself, if that's even the right phrasing, which I don't think it is, in order for there to be not only a correlation, but for there to be any progress or any motion on both levels. I don't have any mode of explanation of psychophysics or biophysics or of abstraction then, if that is the case. Yeah. So yeah, I agree with you. I don't know either. But
I wouldn't know. Probably neurologists might know. but you might be asking the wrong question. Instead of like, I
Maybe
would
it's
say
just
is more, how is the neuron working that way instead of,
right, like a
That's what-
functionalist approach.
yeah.
But
Right.
you're
Because
just
that might
you're
actually
trying
answer
to
the question.
You're trying to like either, if I'm following, and I know something about what you were talking about with that study, and I've heard something similar somewhere, but that there is this, we're far less limited than we think with stuff like that, and so maybe what you're getting at is if we can increase these neural, I don't even know how to describe it, but the thing you were talking about, increase the complexity or increase the number of these nodes of memory or experience, that allows us to make our abstractions more sophisticated. And like, how far can we go? And you're wondering if it still operates the same way as you get more complex and sophisticated. And maybe you're wondering if we can transcend what we believe to be our current limitations and go somewhere else with it at a certain level. Is that kind of what you're wanting to transcend something, or maybe not?
Yeah. Well, yes. Yeah. I'm trying to transcend the ability. So I believe that experience is its own thing, not independent of neurons. I leave that open, but I believe that experience is a thing that might be emergent property of neurons, but experience is a thing, and neurons are a thing. And so, to me, it's ludicrous to assume that if neurons are a thing and experience is a thing, I am not going to completely, even if there's a correlation, be able to come to an inexhaustible explanation about my biology from this emergent property and vice versa. Therefore, there must be this third in order to reassess the categorizations that we're trying to specify in order to further localize new forms of activity. But then the issue is, isn't that already changing the biophysical substrate of what I'm doing? And if the answer is no, then I'm completely confused. And this is the most simple way of saying it. If I have a thought about my neurons, do my neurons now have a particular specification of themselves that obviously has nothing to do directly with the neuron or even indirectly, but somehow has a correlate to which the data is trying to make a self-reference?
Yeah.
If the answer is yes, then at what line do we draw? Is it the self-reference between? Yeah. So it's hard to.
I would say no, because really it is how do I explain it? It would be same as anything else. To how we know or think about something else, it's the same way. It's the same thing. Us thinking about neurons is only after the fact. I guess there was another study done is showing that we actually made the choice before we are aware of the choice.
Yeah.
Before our conscious mind is aware of the choice. So that being true is we can think about neurons before we're actually thinking about neurons. You know what I mean? Because we learned about neurons.
Right.
It's just our brains recalling this information.
Right. But yeah, that wouldn't be the only. I agree. I think that would.
You just don't want to commit and concretize that. You want to keep things open.
Yeah. Yes. Well, the thing is there was one thing. There's one thing that you said that I think might be a problem. So you said you're between the there's experience and neurons. and there might be a correlation, and each of those things probably can't like exhaust what they are. So you said the word there must be, and that might be the problem. There might not be. That's the issue. There could very well could not be an explanation for it, you know.
That fascinates me because, okay, so I know that that's a possibility, but I'll be completely honest. I don't know what domain of inquiry I would be if, like, where do I begin if I accept that possibility? Like, what would be the next thought? And it's still blurry for me. I'm not sure where I would go.
The issue is just like any abstract idea, right? So you can have the abstract idea that well, that's what I think your hypothesis is right now, is an abstract idea, and that's basically what it would still be, you know what I mean? But the mere fact that you're saying there must be a third thing, well, sorry, there's limitations. So, you know, we have physical limitations. There's limitations in the universe. They're just limitations. You know, like.
How dare you? No.
No. You just got to be. I would say is you have to have a pragmatic approach of saying this very well might be the case. I'm not saying you have to. And when we were saying isn't logically impossible.
I agree. Yeah, I understand what you. Yeah.
But I understand where he's going.
The only thing that wouldn't limit it is having a method to distinguish between the abstract and reality, and having it as good or better than the scientific method as of right now. You know.
Right.
So I'm all for you thinking this is the case, and a part of me hopes you're correct, and I like to know more and get more. But until then, it's for right now. I guess it's just an abstract idea.
Right, because we don't. Yeah, right. I like that.
That shouldn't discourage. I think the problem is that it discourages people to. Well, if that's the case, then I'm not even going to try. Which I think that's the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think I like that because this is a difficulty that I have with. Oh, I'm going to embarrass myself. But this is the problem I have with like something like applied mathematics. When I try to get into algebraic topology and stuff like that, once I have to answer a real world situation or an actual fixed logic. There's this weird dimension where, okay, you have to work within the actuality of the case to the best of your ability, but then simultaneously you have to treat it as indeterminate in abstraction. And so, but then that's the trick, right? The trick is, well, if that's the case as well, perhaps the reality of the case might not be something that you can ever come to within this actuality under which you're doing the inquiry, which is beautiful, because then to me, the next question is, then how in the hell am I able to think anything that may not merely be the case?
Yeah.
But that's weird because that's tricky too. I feel like you could say, well, yeah, the neurons might be able to allow to do that too, because we don't know what it means for something to merely be possible. We don't have a law of thought. And so it might not mean that, metaphysically everything's open and infinite like how I want it to be, but it could be the case that, well, look, even under these certain fixed rules, you put these functional processes to work within a neurophysiological system, and you get all these spontaneous generations that have meanings only to the user interface, and not to the actual substrate of how the biophysics is occurring. And that's
and isn't that interesting that we can do that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's bizarre. It's like, where in the loop do you stop? And the answer always has to be, you stop at every possible stopping point to make sure you don't miss anything. Yeah.
Heraclitus is a multi-dimensional alien. Did you guys know?
You blow my spot, man. why?
I mean, what
You
do
don't
I
tell
know?
anybody.
But that's just my perception, you know.
I-
But to understand that, you know, like I can understand what you talk about because I've gotten to know you, and you always come at it from that perspective. And I meant to ask if you were getting at, and I think you were getting at the same thing in the conversation, like maybe an hour ago, when you're wanting to inject the third remainder. Is that like the same you were doing?
Yeah, but in a different way. Yeah, that was kind of what I was trying to do. Because it. It's always hard to phrase that because it could be perceived as metaphysical. It could be perceived as a presupposition in order to necessitate a possibility of that which I don't know, which could be personal and therefore not objective. So that's basically.
But I see
what I was trying.
I see it from, I guess, the metaphysical.
Yeah, that's
because that's how I
mean it
too.
In the comfort of my armchair. That's how I mean it.
But I can see how that's perceived. That's perceived as a loophole, and I've accused you of that. You're just using this fucking dimensional loophole shit that you do to talk yourself into or out of anything. But you know, I see it now. I see the genuine curiosity in your application of it as like a authentic means to way of abstracting.
Yeah, and I like that you brought that up because one of my I think I told you about this friend. I'll tell you more about her later, but I think you know who she is already just by me naming her in this way. So she brought this up as well. I was kind of explaining something in a certain way to her, and I showed her the podcast. That's what I did. I showed her the podcast, and there was apparently a part in the contrast when I was talking about like things that make me cringe or whatever, and she was trying to authenticate herself by saying, "Oh, you know, you can challenge me. You barely like challenge me. You're always so nice, and you're always trying to specify and take baby steps. Really lean it on me, and I'll do the same back." And it's like, yeah, that's rare because you can't. So usually when this has to do with the way I talk. Usually the way that I talk leans people to asking me metaphysical questions and abstract questions as opposed to more scientific questions because of the texture of how I'm speaking. But there has been like two people long time ago, hyper rationalist types. They're annoying as hell, but man, they are great people to talk to if you can if you have patience and you actually care about what the other person has to say. Good on you. So I was talking 8 hours to this guy. I wish I remembered his name. Super cool guy. Completely disagree with him on all fronts. He was a guy, Razor, that basically he was one of those guys that believed in the laws of logic and that you couldn't like go underneath that and you were stuck on that. And so I feel like we'd all like have some contempt for him. But it was basically server invites. But let's see, let me not lose my thread. He basically asked me a really good question. He asked, because I was doing the loop thing, and he said, let's start with rationality. What is that which is rational to say? And then, you know, I went down, you know, the little rabbit hole he was talking about, and I said, well, you know, rationality is whatever you can deduce and induct within a certain specification of an interval within the state of affairs in your mind that you have to figure out the conditions after the fact. And he said, yes. Okay, then why do you care about metaphysics if you already have that in place? And it says, because by definition, if you have, and it is a principle. I get it now, but he thinks the principle is stupid. I don't understand why. I mean, I get it, but I don't get it. And he said, well, why leave things open? Why waste your time? And it's like,
oh my God, no.
It's like, because I don't know.
Cringe.
You know, it's in those
Cringe.
cases where something as bare minimum as not as refusing to admit absolute certainty, that just gives rise to even new forms of rationality. And so
Yeah.
his argument was basically like, well, you're a smart guy, why are you wasting your time with metaphysics? And I'm like, well, ironically enough, and I told this joke to him, it says, well, wouldn't it be perfectly rational that it's smart that I would have the leverage to be able to waste my time? You know, like so
Yeah.
you know, you could always play these stupid games, and it's really hard. So I would love to talk about more specified notions instead of the loop, because it's very easy to break the loop. But because I like creativity and I like to get as broad as possible, and that's usually how I talk, everyone usually just adds to the broadness instead of trying to nip me in the butt and say, you know, well, let's narrow it down. Let's really get to what you're saying. Because most people either get me and they're open to me talking in this way, or they don't get me and they're like, well, I'm just going to insult you. I don't need to call you out because clearly you're a bad actor, because clearly you're smart, but so you can't be dumb enough to be wasting our times without trolling. And that's usually the argument.
I think you're manipulating when it really is genuine, and that's unfortunate. And I think that I don't think it's always about ego for people. What the other guy, I'm not looking at the screen, the other guy that was talking to us was saying that it's ego that gets in the way. And I think that's the case a lot of the times, but I think also a lot of the times people are genuinely abide, like they believe in those laws of logic or whatever limitation they're giving themselves. You know, they just, that's where they're at. They're not trying to, you know, they genuinely believe that. So they're coming at you, not necessarily from ego and admitting they're wrong because they don't think they're wrong, which is even worse. But at least they're being authentic, where they just can't access the point that you're coming from. So they just, either way, they dismiss you. But I think probably more often than not, the people who are challenging your metaphysical perception of whatever is being discussed genuinely think that you're kind of out of line or wasting your time, so to speak. Where I think they genuinely believe that logic is, you know, the laws of logic or whatever limitation they're challenging you from. You know, I think they genuinely believe it. Or, you know, like our friend in the other channel, just, you know, he has his preferences and his own, you know, what he thinks is right or what he thinks people ought to do. And sometimes you can get them to admit that.
Yeah.
but it still didn't change. You know, it's not going to change how he approaches things with me or you, you know, but there it was, the bias that he laid out for us and then added to it even, you know, like that was brilliant.
Yeah, and it's so sad that the most interesting creative positions that are really, I guess, not even really hard to think through, but that just open the mind further are always off the table. Like logical nihilism. That's like one of my favorite ones, like logical nihilism, meteorological nihilism. I wish there was a better word than nihilism, though, because I know how it means in that context. But whenever like someone says nihilism, you think like either a cool guy or an idiot. And like I wish there was,
because it looks the same on the surface. You know, on the surface, the idiot might be saying the same things as the brilliant creative person, but they're coming from a completely different paradigm.
Yeah, exactly.
And then they judge you. The idiot's going to judge you differently than. Did they judge you differently? I guess they
the
would.
idiot, usually.
Well, I think no matter where they're coming from. Well, no, I forgot we were talking about the two different types of nihilists: the idiot, and then they would judge
cool
you
guy.
differently.
What'd you
The
say,
cool guy
Rizzo?
would have a better understanding of.
So I guess I'm a problem solver, and I think about things, and so I was thinking about your nanites and going to like the cellular, I guess cellular level. I mean, is that fair to say?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So what if you had the nanites to start out with to measure like neurons, for example? You know what I mean? So if you're measuring neurons of like what the electrical impulse is, what chemicals are going through, how potent are the electrical, like measure the energy going through it, how powerful the neurons are going through. Because if you have stronger electrical currents going through the neurons, does that help any, or what does that do, and can measure how long they fire for, or this, that, and the other. That data can then maybe give you sort of a way to program the new nanites or the nanites to do what you want them to do.
Yes, exactly. And and then the scary thing about that, not to jump too far into notions like that, but that's when the serious problem of gray goo becomes a serious possibility. Like with that's when the nanites will not only be able to self-replicate, but they'll be able to get smarter and smarter and smaller and smaller. And eventually, and this is where it's a little controversial, but I would stand by this. We already, let me try to find a link for this too, where they proved that you could have solid forms of light for an indefinite period of time. And if we could find a way to create nanites made of said light, because, all it would be is photons with information inside of them creating, And so if we could do that, and then we can replicate, it can self-replicate somehow. Then
don't we already have that with whatchamacallit, the cables there.
what cables?
Yeah, fiber optic.
Oh yeah. We see. Yeah, we already have. What's that called? It's called lot. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, like
where light has information, but the problem is the light having to be on.
Yes. Yeah. And eventually it's be interesting to. I mean, we already have nanomotors, but I'm not sure how that would work in relation to photons. So maybe we have to figure that out too. But yeah, just to finish the point. Yeah, I was just basically going to say I agree with you. So it'd be cool if how quickly can we have such nanites that can learn in that way and create new nanites? And how long would it take to get enough data about these neurons to make something like functional processes permanently programmable by the same functional processes that that we're using to do it?
Well, I mean, with that thing, we would be limited, right? Because neurons are limited to how strong electrical impulse or how long they can go for, what chemicals pass through them, all that type of stuff. A neuron has like limitations to it. Okay, so you would have to have a set parameter inside the nanite within those parameters, right? Basically, you're saying a nanite would replace a neuron.
It would.
So
Yeah.
it would replace a neuron, because a neuron can go fires for whatever, and you can figure that out as long as it's within that time. You know what I mean? Within that physical constraint, I would say,
Yeah.
for lack of a
that's
better
true.
term. So I don't know if they would automatically do it. Do they do it by random? You know what I mean? Would it be random?
In terms
Like
of
you could
how they
program
replace.
it to be random. You could program it to be random. You know.
True, and then and then it gets difficult. Like, what would that mean for us who are
Yeah.
experiencing it?
Is that even you, or is it the nanite?
Yeah, that I have no clue, and that scares me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the self would be is
Oh, wow.
the difficult part.
Yeah, that's an interesting question.
My
Yeah,
brain's going to start hurting soon. But I
see,
love it.
But see, that's what I find weird. And I know this is going to be completely naive, but there seems to be like the interface that is our experience, if that is a right way to put it, and its relation to making to when we look at a brain by using a brain, we have an iconic representation of neurons, and to me, it's like, okay, if you have a nanite that can hone in on that iconic representation of a neuron, what can the nanite do to make it so that that iconic representation becomes more objective, but only like the trick is, like, can you make a neuron better without knowing what the next paradigm of how the neuron should evolve would be? Can you get the nanite? It seems like you. I think that would be the way out of it, right? You can perhaps get the nanite to study all the data of evolution. Perhaps maybe that take forever.
Yeah, my next thing was, well, you now we're talking about evolution here, where our brains develop better and better and better. So I guess we could assume that the neurons were getting better and better.
Right. Yeah, we hope. Right.
Yeah, we would hope they were getting better and better, and then it automatically does it. You know what I mean? Through evolution. So that then would be what? DNA.
Right.
So then now you're saying is we need to find, well, now we've solved it. I guess we solved that one, where then we would need to find out the DNA and what parts of the DNA affect neurons, and you would have nanites affect the DNA.
Yeah, but that's what's so weird.
Yeah, to make the neurons better. So if you made the neurons better, and then you're out of the then you are out of the I guess problem of is it the nanite or you, because all it is changing your genetics, which is still you.
Right. That's the trick. Yeah, I don't want. That's why I was like a little skeptical. I'm like, yes, I do think the nanite can replace the neuron, but I'm like, do I want the nanite to do that? Probably. Like, yeah, I definitely want it to heed to certain intervals in physical constraints like the DNA. But then, yeah, how would you solve this problem? Since we've basically solved that the higher problem of it. Well, now we're at the sub problem, right? Which is like, okay, so how many? Well, not how many. What particular scale of the DNA are the nanites going to be playing with, and can we even catch up? Like, because there's multiple causal chains, right? So it's like,
even if we had nanites everywhere where things are occurring that are what the neurons are to make them better, wouldn't like, am I crazy to say that just because that moment occurred, just because that evolutionary process or whatever functional process occurs thanks to the nanites, or even without the nanites, the reason why, okay, sorry, let me start again. If there's a nanite at the DNA level and it's analyzing how to make the neurons better, it's analyzing the DNA and it like programs the DNA to change, isn't the possibility of it doing that, like, it doesn't add anything to the DNA, it just reprogram it, let's say reconfigures it remodulates how the DNA does something. Does that mean that the DNA is in a sense unchanged, and so you didn't really get at what you wanted to get at? You basically just opened up the DNA further into its dormant possibilities that might not have ever happened, but were already in the DNA, and therefore we'll always be stuck at the limitation of we always have to be at an interval. We can never actually get to the true neuron, the neuron that's outside of all states of affairs, and therefore we're basically the nanites are doing the same thing that our brain is doing and creating a extra part of the brain that does the same thing in a more complex way. Wouldn't it just be that?
Well, no. Well, first of all, I don't think change would be a wrong word to use, because change is just different, right? So basically, rearranging something is you're changing it. You're rearranging it. You might not add new things or lose new things, okay? But it's new. You know what I mean? So it changed. But no, you would be just changing the genetics of whatever it is, just to enhance you're pretty much trying to enhance the human, you know what I mean, aspect of it, trying to help evolution, because that's what evolution does, is pressures on DNA. So if you're changing, if we're, instead of the I guess it would still be environment because of the nanites, but I guess the outside environment, natural environment changing your DNA, it would be the nanites changing your DNA.
Wait, say that last part again. It wouldn't work changing your DNA. It would.
Yeah, it would be the nanites changing the DNA, which I guess I wouldn't have a problem with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so eventually you're going to be passing on genes that only help promote these things. You know what I mean?
Yes. But is the new things that are happening a byproduct of the change alone, or is it a byproduct? And this might be incoherent because this might just be metaphysical hoopla, but or is it the actuality of the DNA in that interval? Because is it merely functional? Now
I think it's the same thing. I think you're saying the same thing, but in a different way.
Okay.
I mean, the DNA's changed actually, you know what I mean? But I guess, I think you're saying the same thing.
Okay, because by actually, I would mean that I know that you're changing the DNA actually, in the sense that you're changing the DNA as what it's composed of, but
no, you're not. You're just saying you're changing the sequence of what's going on.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, the
or
sequence.
You might be adding something. I don't know. Maybe it needs to be added for something else.
Yeah, that's what's confusing. At what point do you change the DNA and it is more than that structure? I guess is the question. Like
you're saying you're asking if.
No, go ahead.
I think you're getting at is that the DNA always had the potential versus making it something that it really never was. Changing it in such a way that it kind of transcends the DNA-ness of it.
That's a good metaphysical way to put it. Like, if you have a nanite that affects the neuron in a way where it actually changes, does that mean that it is more than the neuron that it was? Or does that mean that you just, like Razor put it beautifully before, or did you just enhance it?
Right.
Well, that's what's going on. Like, but here's the thing: is we develop new. We get rid of things that aren't useful for us, and sometimes we carry stuff. You know what I mean? Like a tailbone. We don't have a tail. We still have a tailbone. You know what I mean? So, but our DNA still shows like we're built that way, right?
Right.
So basically, if we removed the DNA part or sequence it differently where we don't have a tailbone, right? Then I see you're just changing something. You're not. I don't know. Like, I think you're just enhancing the neuron instead of, you wouldn't change. Well, you might change, actually. When I think about it now, there's a possibility that you could change what a neuron does. You know what I mean?
Right.
But the only way to know that is for the nanite to relay the information, what it changed, and we have to see the result.
Right. That's what,
I mean,
kind of scary.
Yeah, it's
yeah. That's the part.
Is the DNA infinite? You know, like it is.
Well, that's a really hard question.
It's not infinite. We've done the I guess the coding of it, you know, but we're just enhancing certain parts of the DNA, so to speak, I guess.
See, but I think, you know, if you say you've done the coding and you think that that's concrete, then you're kind of
no. Well, that's the thing is,
I could be wrong.
No. So basically, we've done the coding of like Homo sapiens, for example. The issue we might come into is if we change the DNA, then we might get something completely else, not human. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right. Okay.
So that's one avenue. The second avenue is we could just be enhancing human beings, right? And whatever that entails, meaning you might add something onto the information that keeps them a human, but only enhances their abilities, right? We put more pressures on, like we have some people that are more muscular than others just because of genetics, right? So that trait, we would be enhancing traits, right? So let's say, for example, Einstein had better neurons than most people, right? So if that's the case, what in his DNA it showed the enhancement of the neuron, and then we would try to factor that one out.
Right. So I like that. So okay, is the DNA in science purely defined by its functionality in relation and correspondence to everything else we know, or is it defined? Is it defined is it defined as having permanent features that make DNA outside of, well, it's human DNA or it's biological structure? Is there something for DNA to be outside of a functional discourse, I guess, is the question.
I would say yes. When we're describing DNA, we can tell the differences between different people because of certain factors in the DNA and animals, like how many chromosomes they have, and everything else. So, I guess to describe DNA, there's difference, but what DNA does is I guess we describe it as the functionality of it,
Yeah.
Well, this part of the DNA does this, and we can see like the physical, portion of what it does,
Yeah,
And you're wanting to enhance the complexity of it because who knows what we might find, right? Like,
Well,
Yes.
and I guess the limit, we don't know what it could be, until after, hindsight's 2020, so
right.
Yeah, and it's basically like I'm trying to take the premise. Well, not it's not a premise. It's just like it's a phrase. I don't know who said it first, but I mean it philosophically, obviously, but also pertains to science. And the phrase is, "We know not what a body can do," and so it's like I don't even think we know all the functional processes of DNA yet, and so
right, yeah,
that's the point. But the point being, if we don't know something like that, then whenever we change it in accordance with the nanite, how can we? Because we have to, I guess, we have to make a distinction between new complexity that the nanite or us might notice about the DNA and the changes that are changing the DNA in real time functionally. Like, how would we make a distinction?
yeah. So all right. So the thing would be is then I would say is you would want nanites to go at a DNA level and able to I guess record information,
Yes.
outside outside and internal changes. But furthermore, is it would be in multiple people, and we describe like, oh, this person has blue eyes, and this person has green eyes. This person, what makes it have the green eyes? You know what I mean? Where is this exact location of this thing? And it's just a better mapping of DNA. Then come up with a way to be able to say, okay, to change the DNA, like what changes happen from the environment. You know what I mean? Even the food we consume, does that change your DNA?
We have to have right. We have to have a broad enough.
Or this inoculation that people got, you know what I mean? Does that change the DNA like somebody said, So I don't know. Are we changing our DNA when we eat meat, you know what I mean? Consuming more DNA? So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's where I'm curious about that. Yeah, good.
Yeah,
exactly,
so the thing would be then a nanite would detect all of this thing and record through, I would say, thousands of people, and it records like, are they generally stronger? Are they generally, I would say, smarter? You know what I mean? So
you're just collecting
that would
data,
be my.
right?
What was that?
You're kind of doing that to collect data to.
Yes,
map
and
out.
then with that data, with the data points you get, and you're mapping out the DNA, I would say, better than it is mapped out now.
Yeah.
And all this information, then you can create a nanite that would change things up for the traits that you would want, And maybe one of those traits is enhanced neurons,
Because
Right.
what I was going to ask is, are you guys still talking about the nanites with respect to immortality, or is this taking its own?
Well, you could eventually, you know what I mean? Because what's really going on? It's being decay of cells, but it's also has to do with your genetics of decaying with cells, you know?
Yeah.
Like heart condition problems and all that type of stuff is part because of your DNA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And even
so technically it is longevity, you know?
100%. I think that'll be huge in personalized medicine. The nanites, yeah. I think it already is being used.
So I don't know what I would say is if I was going about this, I would probably go that route before anything else.
That makes sense.
Is use the nanites to collect data first, and only to collect data, and then with the advancement of technology, you could take that data and program better nanites to help change the DNA.
Got you. Without necessarily with the imposition of the possibilities of both its functional and its depth of field compositional structure, right? Because that would just be more and more data that would.
Yeah, you might do
so basically,
in there that
if we changed it from like, I guess if we changed the actual structure of it, like the helix to something else, you know, would it still work?
Right. Yeah.
And if you changed it up, would you be able to gain more information? Would it enhance other information? Would it change a species completely? Would it do? I don't know.
Yeah, that's the fun stuff that I really like. That I really need to get. I love this conversation because I want to get more into that scientifically, because every time I try to do that, I just I get more fascinated about the ontological implications for just posing such questions. And so I always joke around with Amy. Well, I don't think I joke around in this exact way, but at least I imply that, it'd be interesting if I waste too much time on metaphysics, and I have all the information I need to do these nanites, and instead I just focus. I remain in abstraction. So it's,
and that was the intro to your podcast. That was exactly,
Yeah. So I guess an outside perspective, and only talking for this little bit and heard your whole spiel with Tom and everything, I would say that for practical use, I would probably go around nanites at recording at a DNA level.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Just that alone right there would.
That.
Yeah, that would be because that, I mean, anything can be abstraction. You know what I mean? You can go abstraction all you want, but that doesn't mean it's pragmatic. You know.
But that's what he likes to do, and that's why.
So basically, the thing is the more information you get, you can deal with more abstract, right? So if the more information you get about something, I guess the less abstract, but the more abstract you can get, because you're limited in what you're abstracting about. But because you have this knowledge or this information, you're not wasting your time with abstractions that didn't account for this knowledge.
Right. Yes, because you have real data within the particular the actual interval of the case, as opposed to just in your head. Yeah.
Correct. So you have real data for your head to abstract about things while keeping this data in mind.
Yeah. And wait, what'd you say, Amy? Sorry.
I'm saying that's your, you with your love of abstraction, you create that loop in your head of knowing that the data will enhance your abstraction as a means to trick yourself into following through on getting the data.
So that's a way to motivate me to do the nanites, is what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fun. That's a
With
good.
the
That's a
promise
good
of
trick.
further abstraction.
Yeah, that's a good loop. I've tried doing that, but then you could, which I was gonna say, and I think Razor, you would agree with this, but I'm not saying this as an opposition. I agree with what you said, but I'd also do it in the opposite way as well. Like no matter how much data you get from the interval, on principle, you should say something along the lines of, "Oh, there might be something," because abstraction is just another occupation in somewhere in the biophysical substrate, and you could just say, all right, how does this, what is the one-to-one correspondence between this abstraction in what it's trying to say in relation to the intensity of the data from the interval. And so the trick is, I think, I wonder if you agree with this, Razor, but I think you would. You pick both in order to not have to pick either later when you build the next round of nanites that look at the that again look at the data and program the next round, right?
Yeah, yes, exactly. So basically, but the thing is, but you'll never go wrong with having more data.
Well, how do you know when to stop collecting data?
You'd never do. That's the whole point. Science never stops collecting data. You know what I mean? It always brings in new evidence.
So you're saying constantly apply the increased abstraction as the data comes in, so that it's just like a constant.
Yes.
Okay.
So look at. I would say is this way. So if you know nothing about it, right? You know nothing about it, and you have all these abstraction thoughts about, or you have one piece of data, right? Of like, neurons send electrical signals, right? So that one piece of data, okay, kind of limits your abstraction, but it helps you out because it gets rid of the abstractions that don't account for that.
Oh.
Yeah. So basically, then, but if you got more data, like, oh, neurons also send chemicals through one another, you know, back and forth. Oh, okay. And chemicals can affect the neurons. Oh, okay. So now you've got another data point where your abstraction ideas have to keep that into account.
Yeah.
Okay. But you can still, but so basically the first round would be data collecting. The second round is trying to enhance what you're trying to enhance and data collect at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. And then the next one would be data collection and enhance from the data you collected last time.
Yeah.
You know, and it would constantly go on. But with all those data points, your abstraction, you don't waste your time with nonsensical abstractions. It's
and your data
applied abstractions.
Your data collection evolves as you go.
Yeah. Like,
yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like
a lot of things evolve.
It's like a over complexified seesaw, and if let's say every time that the seesaw tries to balance itself, let's call that a round, okay? And so each round, each side of the seesaw has to incorporate novel data in a way that can't immediately flatten into the other side, but rather just incites new caution to the other side and then creates another round. And then that happens forever and ever, which proves not only the infinite, but it proves the infinite infinities to which you can remodulate and reassess the same thing in a different way later on with new data from another seesaw, the meta seesaw on the seesaw. You can keep doing that forever.
Yeah, I was missing the balanced part, like as like a point of like stopping the debt. Like when I asked, how do you know when to stop? And I guess so there's a point.
Well, the thing is we might get to a stopping point. You also have to think about that. We might get to a stopping point.
Right.
We may never, but we could get to a stopping point.
But his analogy gave me that sense of, there's a, in the seesaw analogy, there's a seeking of balance. And I don't know what that would look like with the DNA thing, but it helps me kind of conceptualize how you go about it.
Oh, balance, I just mean constantly incorporating one into the other novelty in a way that that neither side accepts each other as the way they came, but only as the way when they're done with one another. And then once they're done with one another, that's the balance. Insofar as the next round can begin, you can balance it out in an even more precise way. So it's not a real balance. It's probably the wrong word. It's kind of
Yeah, but I don't know, like that's probably something that you guys just inherently understood. But I get it now.
No.
All right, with that, I gotta get going. It's like 1:30 in the morning here, so.
Yeah.
It was great talking to you, Razor. Good
you too. I know on Sundays, like he usually has something on Sundays, but I don't know. There's, I really like Tom and how he can talk to anybody and everything, and he's very well read up on a lot of stuff. And well, as you probably can tell, about the whole monkey thing, about switching heads and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But no, he reads a lot and reads a lot of papers and everything else. Yeah, I don't know what other channels really to go on. I go on the Atheist Experience, and we actually kind of talk about this type of stuff sometimes on the Atheist Experience, but it's kind of been dead lately. And that's really about it.
Well, I'll definitely be around, especially if you're around. Maybe we shoot the shit.
Yeah. I'm always on Sunday nights. So
awesome. I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah, for here. All right, you guys have a good night. Nice talking to you. Bye.
You too. Bye.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, that was fun. Wait, hold on 1 sec. Let me get some water, and let's talk one-on-one in PM.
Gotcha.